All right, hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Michael Burrows and I serve as director of the Kegley Institute of Ethics. And on behalf of the Institute, thanks so much for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us this evening for a very special lecture featuring Dr. Sigal Ben-Porath. I want to begin by thanking our supporting sponsors who make this program possible. The Kegley family, Valley Strong Credit Union, Kaiser Permanente, and Adventist Health Bakersfield. I also want to thank our CACB IT team that has helped us with the technology for tonight's event. Just a few notes on the procedure for tonight's Kegley Institute of Ethics Community Colloquia. So Dr. Ben-Porath will deliver her talk titled Free Speech on Campus. And following that, I will moderate a Q&A session, which will feature all of you, our audience questions. So for your questions, just know that you can submit those via the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit questions at any time. So anytime something strikes your interest in the talk, feel free to drop a question in the queue and it'll be there waiting for me when we get to the Q&A portion of the event. And I will do my best to get to as many of your questions as possible. So don't be shy about asking them. With that, I'm honored to introduce our guest tonight. Sigal Ben-Porath is Professor of Education, Philosophy, and Political Science at the University of Pennsylvania. Among her books is Free Speech on Campus, which she wrote in 2017 while chairing Penn's Committee on Open Expression. In 2020 and 2021, she was a fellow at the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics at Harvard University, where she worked on a new book on free speech and political polarization, tentatively titled Campus Wars and the Struggle for Democracy. In recent years, she has offered guidance to many campuses on policy development and responses to controversies surrounding speech, and she's involved in campus organizations aimed at bridging political divides. Dr. Ben-Porath, thanks so much for being with us tonight. Really looking forward to your talk.
Thank you so much, Michael, for inviting me and for this kind introduction. And I really appreciate everyone sharing their evening with me. I plan to talk, for not too long so that we all can enjoy some time talking with each other. And with that, I'll start the conversation. So I'd like to talk today about questions of free expression and inclusion on college campuses. And these are issues that have become central to campus debates, but also to a lot of our political debates more broadly. And so I want to start off by saying a few words about why we are focusing, or why many of us are concerned about matters of campus free speech today. So first off, just some context to that. We are currently experiencing a lot of struggles in the broader political domain over questions of campus speech. So issues of speech, open expression on college campuses are not something that only students and faculty and administrators worry about. I'm showing you here on this map the states that have recently proposed or accepted legislation that restrict specific types of speech in public colleges and in public schools. This particular map is focusing on legislation around race and diversity. So these are fairly similar bills that have been passed or suggested in these states that you can see here, including my state, Pennsylvania, that is marked here. And they are attempting to regulate what we are saying in our classrooms, or what kind of books we are reading, what kind of courses we are offering, or workshops that we are providing to our staff and the like. This is just the most recent wave. So this is from the summer of this past summer, 2021. But prior to that, we had a wave of legislation that was regulating campus protests. And prior to that, we had the wave of legislation that was regulating some specific protest movement, particularly the BDS movement. Regarding the policies in Israel or approaches to those. So the political struggles over campus speech have really been dominating a lot of the broader public debate in recent years. Why is this happening now? One reason that I'm showing you on your screens is that the country is becoming more polarized. We are seeing the median Democrat and the median Republican moving further and further away from each other. And of course, since 2017, this has become more pronounced. There is, I will just note, as a side comment, there is some debate among political science and political communication folks in regards to the specific ways in which we are polarized, what are the opinions or perceptions that we are polarized around. But it's pretty clear that the public discussion is becoming heated, and that people have strong feelings about those who are members of the other party or those who disagree with them politically. Generally speaking, we see the same struggles or the same concerns rising on college campuses. You're seeing some photographs, some of which I took and some of which were taken for me on different college campuses in the last couple of years. Basically, we have a lot of struggles over the boundaries of expression on our campuses. And the concerns that we are seeing is that students are becoming more and more engaged in some of these civic issues. That's not the concern. That's actually wonderful. But they are raising a lot of concerns about what it is that their professor might say, what it is that guest speakers like myself can legitimately express on campus, who should be invited, sometimes what courses should be offered or what material should be offered in courses, etc. So we are seeing a lot of engagement from students who are contesting the boundaries of acceptable expression on campus. And while some people raise or criticize students for this kind of activity, I actually think that broadly speaking, this is a very positive development, the engagement of students with what they are or what you are, if you're students in the audience, what you are being taught, what your professors are saying to you, the way that you are being treated on campus, the way that you can feel supported and be supported. All of this is really actually an important part of the education that's provided on college campuses. At the same time, sometimes questions about, as I said, the boundaries of speech remain unsolved or are very hard to resolve through these kinds of engagements. For example, I'll just give you a sense of the kind of concerns that are being raised in case you haven't encountered it. The young person who is raising the sign that says "No dialogue with white supremacy" right here on your screen is actually protesting against a speaker from the ACLU. So the person who they are blaming as a white supremacist is actually a person who is involved in protecting open expression and equal civil rights through the American Civil Liberties Union. And the reason that they are calling them white supremacists is because specifically the ACLU is supporting the rights of people with diverse opinions, including people with extreme right-wing views, their right to protest and march. And so this is, again, a concern about the very definition of free speech and its boundaries. Why are we seeing such a strong engagement on college campuses beyond the broader polarization that I just described and that I'm sure all of you have encountered? One important reason is, well, kids these days, right? So people today like sometimes to blame students, to say that they are overly sensitive or that they are responding too strongly. I actually think that one key difference between young people today who are joining campuses as compared to people from prior decades, one key difference is that we really are not teaching young people in high school or earlier than that too much about the importance of constitutional protections such as open expression. And even when they look to express themselves, sometimes in silly ways, like this guy waving a banner that says "Bong hits for Jesus." This is a banner that actually ended up making its way to the Supreme Court in a case that was contesting the boundaries of acceptable expression in a high school event. That's the event that you are seeing here in the photograph. And the court actually ended up saying, well, no, this is not protected speech by the students. So what we are experiencing more and more as young people in this country is that your expression as a high school student and sometimes even as a college student is limited. So college campuses today really are trying to respond to these matters by trying to expand their understanding and their definition of their mission. And while they maintain the long tradition of seeing themselves as institutions that are searching for knowledge and are looking to expand the boundaries of science, the boundaries of other aspects of knowledge that are available to society. So this is really a core justification for college campuses since pretty much their beginning. Beyond that, they are also seeing themselves as responsible for educating a broader segment of society. So if in the past they really were more limited and really allowed access to just a small segment of the population, today we have a lot more institutions and they are opening their doors to more students, more diverse students, students with diverse backgrounds and experiences. And so we have a population on campus that is really more varied, more diverse, has more opinions, more views, more experiences that they are looking to share. And oftentimes they really are coming to this campus from contexts that are less diverse and in which, as I just said a moment ago, their expression or the exchange of opinion is not really valued and sometimes is even not legally permitted. And so the campus is really the first place where they encounter this kind of diverse, lively context where they can engage in a free exchange of ideas. The campus is also expected to prepare students for their future jobs, for the pathways that they would take after they graduate, but is also increasingly expected to prepare students for their civic roles. And so again, when they are coming untrained and with very limited practice in expressing their opinions and exchanging their views, this is a pretty steep learning curve. I would like to suggest that, so this is the part where I move to talk a little bit about how I'm seeing a solution to some of these concerns. And the way that I frame the solution is through the lens of what I call inclusive freedom. So really what I'm trying to advocate for is, first of all, that we think about the matter of open expression, not so much as a question of what the law says, or in other words, what is permissible in terms of court opinions or in terms of our interpretation of the First Amendment. All of these questions are, of course, very important, and of course we have to abide by the law. But a lot of the tensions that we are seeing on college campuses are not about what is legal and what is illegal, but rather what is educationally appropriate, what can sustain our long-standing relationship within our learning community, how can we develop civic ties and really be able to exchange our views in a way that is open and honest and productive, right? So the goal of a college campus exchange is not just for me to be able to express my views or for any of us to be able to express our views, which is the main goal in democracy. The goal on a college campus is really that we also are able to listen to each other and to learn from each other. And so really the questions of free expression on college campus are quite distinct from the questions on in other democratic contexts. Inclusive freedom really is committed to expanding and protecting the boundaries of expression on college campus and making sure that people not only are allowed to express themselves, but also that they are able to express themselves and that they are heard and that others are listening to them. At the same time, inclusive freedom aims to make sure that every one of us is able to participate and to benefit from this expanded boundary of speech. So in other words, if I am permitting everyone to express their views, or as many people as I can, I'm maintaining a broad boundary to permissible expression. I am probably allowing some unsavory opinions to be heard. I might even allow for some people to express views that are hurtful to others, right? And so when I'm doing that, I have to recognize that as an institution, I have created a burden on some of my students or some members of my community, and this burden is not equally shared. Some people are carrying this burden more than others. So if I am permitting, for example, bigoted views, people who are experiencing this bigotry as targeting them, right? Whether it's racism, whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's views of negative views about different groups in society, if these views are permitted on campus or protected on campus, and I'm, looking forward to saying a little bit more and then probably having an exchange with you regarding why they should be permissible rather than censored or silenced on campus. If these views are allowed, then some people are struggling with hearing them and experiencing these views in our community. And so the institution has to take on the responsibility for alleviating this burden, for taking on itself, on the institution, on the university or college, some of the burden that is created by open expression. This is basically the short version of the argument that I'm offering. Inclusive freedom has to take into account both the necessity of open expression and the necessity of creating equal conditions for learning. And this is the responsibility of the institution, and administrators and faculty people, as well as clubs and other groups, have to take it on themselves. Okay, so this overall will create an inclusive climate. Let me offer one last distinction, and then I'll speak for a few moments about how it's applied, how I've tried to apply it on my campus and others, and then That's where I will stop. So the one last distinction that I want to offer is between types of speech that are permissible and types of speech that are not permissible on a college campus, and particularly in a classroom. Okay, so a lot of people like to blame campuses for creating safe spaces and for caring too much about student safety. I would like to suggest that safety is a pretty good thing. It's a good idea for campuses to create safety for their students, especially so that they are able to express themselves. Of course, when I'm talking about safety, the type of safety that I care about, and I describe here as dignitary safety, is a safety that really is supporting the capacity of all students, or the ability, the opportunity that all students might have to participate and to see themselves and to know that others are seeing them as equal members in the community. Intellectual safety, on the other hand, is actually not a productive aspect of college campus. And so it's just important to keep the two apart. When we are coming to campus as students, or also as faculty or in other roles, in order for us to be able to take intellectual risks, meaning to go outside our comfort zones, to try on new ideas, to try to learn new perspectives, to have productive exchanges with each other, to take difficult classes in topics that we haven't tried before. To be able to do all of that, in other words, to go outside of our intellectual safety or familiar zone, and to take risks, to do that, we need to make sure that our dignitary safety is actually protected. So there is a type of safety that is protecting our dignity and ensuring our equality as campus members. And that kind of safety is actually important for campuses to defend, so that intellectual risk-taking becomes possible. Okay, so how is all of that taking place, or how is all of that operationalized or enacted on campus? I'll just very briefly talk about some context in which this is happening, and because I'm doing it quickly, I'm of course happy to go back and go into any details that you might be interested in. Classrooms are the main places where, in which our learning communities are constructed and maintained. And so it's very important that as faculty and also as students, we are able to take part in them in an equal way, in an intellectually honest way. Faculty have to take responsibility to plan their classes such that they know if they are raising controversial topics, if they are going to bring up a reading or a question that is going to be difficult, or is going to be creating some strong discussion in class, and they have to give a heads up to students, or they have to prepare for how to address difficult questions that come up. But of course, we also know that classrooms are sometimes unexpected contexts, and we have to be ready for whatever we didn't plan for as well. And there are a lot of opportunities for faculty, both young faculty and more experienced ones, to learn how to differentiate between controversial expression in class that is helpful, productive, or otherwise. Sometimes these limits are described as norms of civility, and I think civility has its value. Of course, in these norms are relevant to a lot of contexts in society, including the classroom, but civility doesn't really fix everything for us within a learning community. And so I don't think we should suffice with requiring that people speak in a polite way. And we should set norms that are more appropriate for our classrooms. Outside of the classroom, there are a lot of other things that are happening, a lot of other exchanges, and a lot of our free expression is taking place outside of the walls of the classroom. The photograph that you are seeing is an event in which this got a little bit out of hand at Berkeley. And I think universities and colleges need to take into account the importance and the lively nature of student activism today, and to support student groups, including those that sometimes have a hard time organizing on their own and might need institutional support for making their voices heard. And students too should keep in mind that while it's very useful oftentimes to organize ourselves around our given sometimes identities or ideologies, it's also very important to figure out ways to build coalitions and to create opportunities to build bridges and to exchange views or to promote shared perspectives across difference. One example that is very useful to keep in mind, just sort of to give you a sense of what I mean, there are some groups, for example, on my campus who are working on issues related to climate. And the climate concerns really cut across different identity groups and different ideological perspectives. And so this is one place where you can say, here is a concern that we share, here is a policy that we might look to advance. And so we can build coalition across our different groups, even if we organize still based on our different identities or other features. When free speech is really at its best, in my view, or well, maybe best is a little bit of an exaggeration, but when it's working, then we can see events that are taking place in which diverse opinions and perspectives are really expressed in a forceful and significant way. And a lot of people are able to hear and listen to them. And the example I'm showing you here is a speaker that was invited to Penn by the Federalist Society, which is a conservative association of law students. And so they invited a speaker that some other students, especially Black students, but also others, found to be offensive. And so the university, some parts of the university supported the Black Students Association in organizing, as you can see here, a pretty significant protest right outside the room where the talk was taking place. So people walking to the talk would see this protest. They could still enter the talk still took place. There were people in the room asking hard questions, some who were supportive of the views of the speaker and some who were opposing these views, but generally speaking, both those who were interested in hearing her and those who were unhappy about the fact that she was invited got their voices heard quite well. Similarly, and I'm not sure if this is a live topic on Bakersfield's campus, but we are experiencing regular visits from speakers who are not members of our community and are coming in to express views that many people on our campus experience as hurtful. And so we are supporting our student groups and through various structures such as our free speech observers and organized events to counter hateful speech such as the one you're seeing on your screens, looking to make sure that when speech like that, which is protected by the First Amendment, and so we have to allow on our college campus does not remain without a response. So in sum, inclusive freedom on campus is really an effort to ask ourselves who is included and then what views are included, and making sure that we develop together norms of searching for knowledge and disseminating it. This is something that a campus community, or questions that a campus community have to continuously be engaged with. Who is responsible for including people and topics, right? So it's not enough to say, well, yes, everyone is allowed to speak. We actually have to take active steps as a campus community to ensure that people who are repeatedly silenced on our campus are able to speak up and be heard. The topics that are left out of our discussion and might be relevant to some of us are actually raised. What recourse do members have if their expressive or dignitary needs are not addressed, right? So to what extent can someone really be heard if they feel that that their voice is being silenced? Who can they turn to? And these are questions, again, that the campus has to make sure that there are clear and available answers to them if inclusive freedom is to be protected. And then, of course, finally, can the dialogue continue? We are always talking not about a single utterance, or a single event or a single speaker, but about an ongoing relationship in which we all are engaged in promoting our broad mission. So that's what I wanted to share with you today, and I look forward to hearing your comments and questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ben-Porath, for the fantastic and super relevant talk as well for some of the issues that we're considering, both in our community and obviously across the nation, as you pointed out. We do have questions popping into the queue, so I want to go ahead and get to those. Our first question comes from Angela, and Angela asks, can I ask how to differentiate between dignitary harm and intellectual challenge when sometimes views attack the dignity of other people? Would that still be considered intellectual challenge?
Right. So this is, of course, right off the bat, a very good and very hard question. And I would say that there isn't a very clear and shared line across all instances. I'll give you an example for what I mean. A few years back, the person who was the president of Harvard University was giving a talk at a public event, and he raised the possibility of trying to explain why there aren't as many women in math and science, especially at the top of these fields. And so he said, well, maybe women are just less capable. I don't remember his exact words, but the gist of his the opinion he considered was, well, maybe women are just not as good at these fields. Maybe it's just not something that their brains are built for. So this, I have to say, well, I don't think is accurate. I also don't think that many people would agree with that. I generally would not see that as a dignitary harm. I would see that as a effort to raise an intellectual challenge, trying to explain a difficult social phenomenon, right? We do have fewer women in the top of the math and science fields, but we don't have a good explanation for that, or there are diverse explanations for that. If you and I, Michael, are having a conversation about that, and you're telling me maybe women are not built for that, I would tell you, look, I don't think that's the case. Let's look at some other options. But if I am a faculty person at Harvard, right, or if I'm somebody, a young, a middle school girl who is interested in science, I'm experiencing this statement as a dignitary harm, right? Why? Because this is a person with a lot of authority. He also has authority about, hiring and promoting women in these fields. I mean, this is a person who is really sending out a message that is undermining the equal dignity of women in these fields. And I think this is how it was heard, and a lot of people took, had a strong response to that. So the context in which the statement is made is really important, right? Just to compare that, I had a student in class a number of years back. It was a male student, and he suggested that women cannot do as well in math and sciences because they have smaller brains. And so it's just really a matter of, and so this, I thought that was a very, very silly thing to say in my class when I'm grading your work. But regardless of that, I experienced that as a missed effort to for taking an intellectual risk. It wasn't that nobody was harmed or hurt by that, right? So the context, is it classroom or public? The person speaking, do they have authority? And sometimes even their intentions. So it might be the case that I would say something that is hurtful. I didn't mean to do that. But I'm having a hurtful impact. I'm actually undermining the dignity of one of my students or some of my students. So maybe, if we have a relationship, I can repair that, right? And so that's, again, it's not a mathematical answer. It's not a full, clear line. But I think the most important thing probably is to make sure that if somebody is expressing that their dignitary safety has been undermined or harmed, their experience matters, and we have to listen to that, and we have to figure out ways to repair that.
So our next question comes from Raquel. And Raquel asks, do you see student protests becoming more aggressive, or are they typically more peaceful, especially compared to protests outside of campuses? Curious if younger generations are doing protests better.
If younger generations can you say that one more time?
Are protesting in a better way?
Oh, that's such a lovely question. I really enjoy and appreciate observing student protests, both on my campus and on other campuses. I think, sometimes they are aggressive. So, things can get out of hand sometimes. But I would say that generally speaking, students that I've seen or interacted with really on many, many college campuses tend to be very creative. They tend to be very thoughtful. Even when they are more forceful, they oftentimes are able to listen or to take a step back. I really do not think that students are more aggressive, as a general matter. if you look at protests during the Vietnam War, student protests, I don't think those were exceptionally peaceful in all cases, right? So, or the sweatshop riots, in the 1970s. I mean, there is a long and storied, and again, in my view, in most cases, beautiful tradition of young people engaging in an effort to create a better world, right? And again, sometimes they do it too forcefully, or sometimes they are looking to silence others along the way. So, protests are a matter of passion, and that they are not always calculated. And so overall, I think there is no reason to worry, even when there are here and there instances where talks are disrupted. That's not good. When they can't go on, it's fine to interrupt. But if the talk really has to stop, that's not so good. If there is physical aggression, obviously that's not good. But really, those are on the margins. I've seen students, invite a practice of the marching band to take place outside in unsavory talk that's taking place. I mean, people do all sorts of cool things. I think it's great. So I have actually no concerns about kids these days in this regard.
So, Dr. Ben-Porath, waiting for a few additional questions to come in, and I have several written down here as well that have been on my mind. Speaking on student protests, do you mark a distinction between protests that try and shut down the talk that's happening, or cover over the speech that's happening? You mentioned like the marching band, for example. So it seems like one kind of protest might actually try and prevent the event from happening or make it inaudible so that it can't be heard, versus the kind of protest that you were talking about associated with Black Lives Matter, where the event went on that was controversial, but the Black Lives Matter voices were also heard as well at the event. So do you mark any value distinction between those kinds of protests? And part of the reason I asked that question is I know previously at a previous university I worked at, not CSUB, but actually there was a debate amongst faculty about student protests who were basically playing loud music and talking over a controversial preacher who would come on campus and say offensive, controversial things. And there was a debate about whether that was productive protest or a violation of, free speech that should be supported. So you don't need to comment on that particular case, but I'm wondering if you see a value distinction between those kinds of protests.
Right, great. So, the chancellor at UC Irvine, who is a strong supporter of a free speech, Chancellor Gilman, has developed a set of guidances for protests that are permissible versus those that are disruptive. And I think, it's a useful guide. It's a very, it's written in legalese. So, but, it's helpful for getting a sense of what is allowed or not allowed. And Michael, you get to some of those differences, specifically whether the event can go on. But I will just say, I'll say the following. Sometimes a disruption becomes too much for the event organizer because the organizer wasn't prepared to address the disruption, right? So it's not only on the students or whoever it is that's protesting or causing the disruption. It's also on us if we arranged an event and weren't ready for it to be controversial. So my example in my in my talk, in my slides, with actually the same one that mentioned the controversial preacher who is coming in with these awful statements. We bring in people who are free speech observers. So they are trained in that, but really they don't have, it's not police, they don't have uniforms, they're actually graduate students in many cases, or they are staff people at the university, and all they have is a lanyard, and the lanyard has a tag that says free speech observer. That's the entirety of their authority. This and some training in which, they are ready to come and protect your open expression and mine. So, right, if we are looking to disrupt each other, they basically are coming to mediate. You want to say that my talk shouldn't go on, you want to raise a banner, you want to yell some things, they let you do that for a minute or two, and then they come over and they say, look, Michael, we understand you're mad, but all of these people around here came to see or listen to this speaker, and you have to sit back down or you need to step out, right? You can give out leaflets for why you hate me, for people when they step outside. So they're trying to figure out a way for your concerns to be raised and my talk to still go on, right? And so sometimes if we weren't ready, right, it's on us, right? So the disruption is reasonable, it's strong emotion, it's sometimes loud, but we should be ready to protect it as a form of speech, rather than look to, for ways to silence it and go on with our thing. The exchange is really what matters. And if it's heated, it's a good thing. This is what I most miss in these talks being on Zoom. Nobody ever yells at me because the chat is disabled, right? So I wish people could unmute themselves and say what makes them angry or happy or something, but this is a little bit more neutral in this way, right? And that's a loss for everyone, right? I miss protests.
Yes.
Not that I'm saying I'm never looking to offend anyone, right? But if people are mad, I want to know that.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So there's the philosophical question, or value question about, who should speak or the kinds of protests that we think are valuable or productive. But there's a practical dimension that you're bringing up that's interesting. Are we prepared even to just, when we're developing an event, to even be prepared for accommodating a protest and what people are trying to say? That's an interesting point. So there's two questions here that are similar. So I'm going to read both of them. There's a question from Brick and a question from an anonymous attendee. And Brick's question is, are there any examples of speech that should not be allowed? Just full stop. And the anonymous attendee asks, some political positions are intellectually defensible, but seem hurtful to certain groups or individuals. While people who feel injured by the speaker's position have a right to protest, do they have the right to stop the speaker from speaking? And that's similar to what we were talking about, and I think kind of somewhat related to what Brick is asking about. Are there certain examples of speech that just should not be allowed?
Great. So these are really great questions. And I would say, well, first of all, of course, the right to free speech is a bounded right. It has boundaries, it has limits, like all rights, property right. I mean, all rights have limits, and free speech is not different. So of course, if I am inciting violence, that's illegal, right? If I am if I'm saying something about you publicly, Michael, and this, if I'm going around saying Michael is actually a thief and he's whatever, done something wrong and it's not true, right? It's libel. And so that's indefensible as well, right? So that's not legal. So there are forms of, that's not a very interesting part of the answer, but we just have to recognize that the law does prevent some form of speech. I will add two things to that. One is that the university any university, right? Higher education institutions have their own norms about impermissible speech and permissible speech, right? So for example, I cannot steal your ideas, right? Is, is legitimate in some contexts, but professionally speaking, our norms don't permit for me to use your ideas and claim them as my own, and other things, right? I cannot come to my philosophy class and teach chemistry, right? So again, it's a protected speech, but it's impermissible within the professional norms of my institution, right? And there are even contexts in which I can be compelled to speak a certain way. For example, I can be compelled to read attendance, even if I don't want to, if my institution requires that, right? So these are small things, but there are ways in which the norms of the institution call for certain forms of expression. But I'll get to the part that I think that both questions really care more about, and that is, are there political views or forms of, social views, forms of expression that really are not legitimate and should not be allowed? And I will just take it onto campus, right? So are there things that we should not permit on our campuses? Here, there is a distinction between campuses that belong to public systems and campuses that belong to private ones. Generally, I don't focus on this distinction and I don't care about it at all. I think that universities should operate based on the same principles and shouldn't actually take more, there's some caveats to that, but generally, if Penn as a private institution is allowed to limit speech more than the University of California system is allowed as a public system, I don't think we should take that liberty generally. I think we should operate on the same, within the same boundaries. And those boundaries say that generally speaking, political views should be very broadly protected. So not incitement to violence, for example, but expression of views, including ones that hurt feelings quite significantly, are permissible legally and should remain permissible as long as this is the, legal system in which we operate. But I still think that that should not be the end of the conversation. Right. So let's say that on your campus, and similarly, I would argue even on on private campuses, speech that is based in hatred or in bigotry is permitted because that's what the First Amendment says, and that's what even some interpretations of academic freedom maintain as well. The fact that it's allowed does not mean that it's a good idea, and it does not mean that we should support it actively as an institution. Rather, what we should do is to try and mitigate it, or to try and balance it out, or to try and say, look, here is this person who somebody invites, like in my example with the Black Lives Matter, right? A group of students decided to invite this woman. I personally really don't like what she has to say. I think she's both wrong and she's biased, right? That's my view personally. At the time that she was visiting Penn's campus, true story. So I was the chair of the Committee on Open Expression. So who more than me could come and say, look, this visit is actually not protected by our guidelines. You may not come. Supposedly, I don't think I actually had that authority, but let's say that I would have taken this into my own hands and decided that. Right now, there is a different person who's chairing the same committee. I don't know who it is. Maybe that person is actually, I don't know, maybe they are racist, or maybe I don't think they are, but let's say, right? I don't know who's the next person. They can make the same decision that I made to silence a person and cancel a visit the students were inviting, really with the very opposite perspective in mind, right? And so I think it's really important not to create a censorship committee, right? Not to take away the responsibility, the power, the voice of a student group who are deciding to invite somebody they're interested in. Maybe they wanted to argue with her. Some of them did. And some of them agreed with her. What can I tell you? It's true. But if I didn't allow them to invite her, they would still agree with her. I didn't fix it at all, right? I didn't change their minds. Maybe if they hear her, maybe they will say, oh, okay, actually, not so great, right? Here are my friends and they are protesting outside and she's saying really hurtful things. I'm gonna reconsider. So I can hope that this would happen, but it's the institution's responsibility to make sure that it's not just her voice that's being heard.
Thank you. It's a very interesting response. And we have another question from an anonymous attendee. Do you have an opinion on the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, acronym is FIRE, and in general, the political trope of a left-leaning academia shutting down ideological diversity on campus? Is there an element of manufactured crisis, or is free speech really in crisis on American campuses?
I love this question. It's really great. So FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, is actually based in Philadelphia, and I have a lot of opinions about them. I won't share all of them right here, but I will generally say that along with other institutions and community groups, they are making an effort to protect individuals who are whose rights of free speech are abridged, whether they are students or faculty, and whether they are politically or ideologically leaning in one way or the other is a matter of discussion. And I'll put that aside with your permission and answer the main issue here, which is free speech in crisis on American campuses? And are professors really trying to brainwash their students to be, I don't know, socialists or something? The answer is no. There is actually no crisis, in my view, inside college campuses. There is surely no indoctrination crisis. The less than serious response that some of my colleagues are offering is, I cannot even get my students to read the syllabus. Can I really get them to share any political opinion that I might have? I really don't think that my political views are evident to my students. Even when they are evident, I make no effort to convince them to believe the same things. There is zero evidence for students being penalized, like by their grades or some other things, for having different political opinions than their professors. People are looking for evidence of that everywhere, and they haven't found any. FIRE, the organization that was mentioned, has listed a few hundred cases of people who were threatened or sometimes actually fired, but in most cases threatened with various sanctions for expression, sometimes something they said on social media or in class. This is a tiny fraction. We have, 4,000 institutions of higher education in this country. They employ hundreds of thousands of people. 400 cases of some, an administrator telling a professor that they shouldn't have said that, when the administrator really shouldn't intervene with what the professor said or didn't say. I mean, this is really so insignificant. I think the real crisis that we have with campus speech is a crisis of perception. This was the first little map that I showed when I started talking. There is a lot of effort coming from legislatures, from sometimes other outside groups, that are trying to limit what is permissibly done on college campus, whether it's laws like laws like in Wisconsin that are limiting student protests or threatening students with expulsion when they are disrupting events, whether they are laws about diversity and inclusion or critical race theory, as I said, in public schools and universities. So I think my biggest concern is about the outside forces trying to limit open expression on campus. If you look, this is my last sentence on the matter. If you look across all the institutions that we have in this great democracy, whether it's Congress or whether it's religious institutions or whether it's various other institutions that you can find, university and college campuses are among the ones where there is most the broadest boundaries for expression and the broadest support for as many people as possible to participate in a discussion. Are we perfect? No, we're definitely not perfect. There is a lot to improve, but stripping away tenure as the effort right now in Georgia, or limiting the way that students protest from the outside, as the legislatures, as I mentioned in Wisconsin, are doing, I think these are misguided actions. I think generally speaking, the crisis is more a crisis of democratic polarization than a crisis of campus open expression. We're just caught up in that, and we need to defend the work that we are doing in protecting diverse expression on college campuses.
So thank you so much, Dr. Ben-Porath, and for the wonderful talk and the great engagement with questions too. So we're at time, and I see we've gotten through our question queue. So I think this is a good time for us to begin to say goodnight. And just again, want to thank you so much for visiting us virtually. Hopefully we can have you in person sometime. And thank you so much to our audience for being with us tonight and asking some great questions too.
Thank you so much, Michael. I really enjoyed that. I appreciate the audience and their questions, and I really hope to get to meet you and some of your students and colleagues in the future. Thank you so much.
Sounds great. Thank you. And good night, everybody. Stay safe, and we'll see you sometime soon. Take care.